Welcome at ICT University. In this video, we'll talk about several of the primary components of a computer. Beginning with random access memory or RAM, which is also referred to as system memory or just memory. But before we start, let me first start explaining the difference between memory and storage, because those terms are sometimes used incorrectly or mixed up. Storage refers to the hard drive of a computer. It stores all the data for your computer, including the operating system, the applications that are installed, the configuration data, and all your personal files. For example, if you need to work in a word processor, then all the files required to load that application are also retrieved from the hard drive and loaded into memory. But when that application is closed, those files are no longer needed, and they can be removed from memory and reloaded the next time they're needed. The memory is still physical hardware just like a hard drive, but the primary difference is the architecture of that hardware. Most traditional hard drives use magnetic storage on a spinning disk, whereas memory is just a collection of chips with no moving parts, so accessing data from memory is much faster than accessing it from the hard drive. Therefore, you load the data you need from the hard drive into memory. While that data is in memory, it can be accessed very quickly. The issue then can be how much memory your system has. If the amount of memory is low, then working on many files at the same time is going to be more difficult. But if your system has a very large amount of memory, then you can work on more files more easily. Another key difference between memory and storage is that memory is volatile. This means that it requires power to retain its data, so if the power went off or the system completely failed, whatever was in your memory is lost. Hard drives or storage are static. They don't require power to retain data. The reason we use volatile memory and not make the memory also non-volatile is that to this day, for the RAM in your computer, it will be too expensive. But it is possible. This is the technology that's used for devices such as flash drives and solid-state drives. Laptops are usually smaller than a desktop but use the same type of physical chip but smaller. The physical chip in a laptop is referred to as a small outline dual inline memory module or SODIMM. A DIMM chip on its own would be what you'd find on a desktop. The small outline refers to the fact that it is a physically smaller chip due to the limited space within a laptop. They're usually about 2.5 to 3 inches in size, depending on the model of the laptop, with a varying number of pins and notches, depending on the model of the laptop. The pins are the actual point of contact with the system's motherboard. And the notches are there to ensure that the chip is aligned properly and held securely in place. It's possible to install additional memory into a system, effectively upgrading your computer, or get faster chips to make your computer faster. But always before you do, you should consult the motherboard documentation, to confirm that the memory can be upgraded. Almost every system will allow you to do this, but if you're dealing with a very outdated system, it can be difficult to find compatible memory modules. The specifications of individual memory chips change quite often, so be sure to determine how much you're currently using and the maximum amount of supported memory within that system. There are many vendors and manufacturers of memory modules, but in most cases, it comes down to the specifications, and if they match, modules from different vendors can be used, and in most systems, the capacity of each module does not have to match. For example, if your system currently has 2 physical modules, each one with a capacity of 2 GB for a total of 4, but there are also 2 more available slots, then you could install 2 Mark chips of 4 GB each for a total of 12. When specifically upgrading or replacing the memory module on a laptop, you should first turn off and disconnect the power supply and use a static wristband. Then in most cases, on the bottom of the unit there is usually a door that can just be removed to access the memory. You might need a small screwdriver, or it might just have a release clip, but the memory module itself is usually inserted on a bit of an angle. Then just press down slightly to engage the clips that snap into place and hold the module securely in its socket. From that point, just make sure that all modules are seated correctly and securely, then simply replace the compartment door to complete the upgrade. So, turning to video cards, these are the devices responsible for producing the video image and sending it to your monitor. In case of a desktop, it will only be a video card. It's a card that essentially looks like a small version of a motherboard, but it sits in a slot on the actual motherboard and is usually held in place with screws or perhaps with clips, but it's a very replaceable unit. You could just remove the cover, take out the existing card, and install a new one, if you want to upgrade. But in a laptop, you generally don't see a video card. It's usually built right into the motherboard, so it's not really a replaceable component unless you replace the entire motherboard. But most laptops also have external outputs so that you can send a signal to a secondary monitor or to a projector. In most cases, this is just a secondary interface of the same card, but it depends on the make and model. Older desktops often only came with a single video card, with a single interface. So, if you wanted to connect a second monitor, you had to install another video card. Some desktops, however, had an integrated video built right into the motherboard, and a video card, in which case you could hook up a secondary display without needing an additional card. But the built-in interfaces usually didn't offer particularly high performance. These days, newer video cards offer very high performance and have multiple interfaces, all on a single card. High-performance video cards are found mostly on customized gaming systems, or specialized graphic design systems. The batteries for laptops are generally replaceable, but you should always refer to the manufacturer's documentation to ensure that you get a compatible replacement unit. Most laptops will have a latch or a release button, usually on the bottom of the unit, that releases the battery entirely. Then simply insert a new one into the existing compartment. In some cases, you may see a lid with a screw. Just be sure to test the new battery first, by powering up the laptop without the power cord, to ensure that it's running from the battery. The central processing unit or the CPU is effectively the brain of your computer, and every computing device has some kind of CPU. If you want to upgrade or replace the CPU, consult the documentation for the specific make and model of your motherboard, to determine if the CPU could be upgraded. In many cases, replacement might be your only option. For example, in most desktop systems, you could usually replace the CPU if it was damaged or faulty, but it might not be upgradable. In other words, you could remove the old one, but you had to replace it with a new one with exactly the same specifications. In most cases, when a CPU is upgraded by the manufacturer, the physical size of the chip changes, so it simply wouldn't fit into the existing socket. There are some CPUs that simply offered upgrades in speed which could be installed into existing systems. But you just must make sure that your motherboard supported it. Some motherboards may have more than one physical socket, so a second CPU could be installed, but those are usually found in specialized or higher-end computers, such as network servers. If you can upgrade, then you may also have to adjust the configuration of your system to ensure that it realizes the increased capabilities of the new processor, such as its clock speed and the optimal operating temperatures, to ensure the fan engages appropriately. The system board or the motherboard is a replaceable unit, but this can be a complicated issue, unless you are replacing a faulty unit with the exact same make and model. But even then, it's still an involved process because almost every other component needs to be removed before the system board can be taken out. If you're looking to upgrade to a newer or better performing motherboard, then this could result in having to buy all new memory, an entirely new CPU, new video card, and several other components, because the new board may not support your existing components. So, in truth, it's not a bad idea to consider replacing the entire computer before you replace the system board itself. And this is especially true if you're dealing with a laptop. It is possible, but in terms of the time, the effort, and the cost, it just might not be worth the investment. The power connection or the DC jack may also warrant replacement of the entire laptop itself. That's not to suggest that a faulty DC jack can't be repaired, but in most cases, it would require soldering to repair it as the existing jacks are almost always integrated onto the system board. So, you would have to desolder the old one and solder in a new one. And if you apply too much heat to the wrong area, you could damage the entire system board itself, in which case you're no further ahead. The body and/or the frame for both desktops and laptops can be replaced, but again, check with the documentation first, especially for laptops. But the frame is the internal metal chassis where you mount all the other internal components, including the system board. It's measured by width, depth and height, and then once all your components have been mounted, there's a plastic cover to close everything up, and complete the aesthetic appearance. But the plastic cover itself is usually composite material, usually strong and lightweight, so that it doesn't add much weight to the unit. For desktop computers these days, there are many options available, at least for customized systems, but for a laptop, this would be likely only available from the manufacturer themselves, or through an authorized vendor. There are many other components when it comes to computers, but for now we've covered some of those which are most required in virtual systems.